Our reading today comes from 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verses 5 through 23. David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen lurched. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him there, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was angry because the Lord had burst forth with an outburst upon Uzzah, so that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, "How can the ark of the Lord come into my care?" So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into his care in the city of David. Instead, David took it to the house of Obed-Edom in the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all of his household. It was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all his belonging and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought out the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a liner ephod. Hope I got that right. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place, inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and offerings of well-being before the Lord. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the offerings of well-being, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts and distributed food among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, to each a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins. Then all the people went back to their homes. David returned to bless his household, but Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants' maids, as any vulgar fellow might shamelessly uncover himself." David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me in place of your father and all of his household to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. I will dance before the Lord. I will make myself yet more compatible than this, and I will be humbled in my own eyes. But by the maids of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. The reading of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Next couple weeks, we will be looking at some stories of people that are in the Spirit or wanting to know about the Spirit. David came to mind. In this story, I have to confess 2 things. First of all, it is a fun text. It's a little bit strange, David dancing before the ark. This was something that I preached at Ghost Ranch some 15 years ago. And the other confession is one of the reasons I also like this story is because I love old school Indiana Jones. Now, Indiana Jones kind of series, part of it takes place in the Southwest. In fact, some of it was actually filmed on Ghost Ranch, but my favorite is the original Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, some of you may have had that movie ruined by Mayim Balak and Jim Parsons' characters on the sitcom The Big Bang Theory, which it also has a great theme song, by the way. And I was running this by my friend Court, who said, beware, because nerds either like the Big Bang Theory or they hate the Big Bang Theory, so you tread carefully. But in that sitcom, they pointed out that the Raiders of the Lost Ark has a plot hole. It turns out that Indiana Jones actually has no impact on the story, according to those sitcom actors. The evil Nazis would have found the ark, they would have opened it, they would have been killed by the angel of death, which was like the scariest thing for a kid that grew up in the 1980s. Yeah, that kind of bothered me for a while. You know, kind of all that face melting part, and also the part that Indiana Jones didn't take part in the plot. And I realized that, this is actually a plot hole problem, but it is not a story problem. And I think what we like most about Raiders of the Lost Ark is the story. The plot is just a device for us to meet Indiana Jones, everyone's favorite archaeologist. And believe me, I lived in Montezuma County, which has the highest concentration of anthropologists and archaeologists in the United States. And I was surprised by the lack of fedora wearing, whip handling amongst the scientific community out there. But we like Indiana Jones. In fact, we like Indiana Jones that the rest of the series all started out as Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and it went on and on. We like Indiana Jones because he is an action hero in a very mundane field. We can imagine that there is more to our teachers, more to our bankers, more to our librarians, and perhaps even our own field. We like Indiana Jones because he fights Nazis and grows as a character. At the beginning of the story, he is very self-consumed, self-centered. He wants to get all the praises for finding all the treasures and putting them in a museum. In the 1980s, though, we see Indiana Jones grow as he overcomes greed, as he overcomes treasure seeking, and he eventually finds faith. Perhaps not systematic theology, but he definitely has faith in his friends and a faith in the world around him. Now, we are talking about Indiana Jones because in our story, David has just found the lost ark. Or rather, the Philistines, who have had the ark for several years after they defeated King Saul and took it from the people of Israel, they get tired and they kind of sent it back. But David now sits in a place where he says, well, we can do something with this. Unlike Indiana Jones, David does not want to put it in a museum. Rather, he wants it returned to the people of Israel and become kind of the chief center or the attraction of his new seat in power in Jerusalem, in the city of David. It will also legitimize his hold on the kingdoms of Judah and Israel and show above all his devotion to the one true God, the one whose mighty hand defeated Pharaoh and brought the chosen people out of slavery, the Lord of hosts who brings victory in the field of battle, the God who created the earth and the sea. Now, David himself is many things. He's a singer, he's a songwriter, he's a warrior, he's a ladies' man, a benevolent father, a good friend, terrible enemy, adulterer, and a man who has a loose grasp on the truth. He can be a little bit tricky. But one thing that is consistent about David throughout his life is he is faithful to the one God of Israel. So it is natural that when he hears the ark has returned, that he will restore it to its proper place of worship. Now, one of the problems he encounters is the Ark of the Covenant has been gone for a while. King Saul, like I said, lost it in battle. He lost also the priest who attended the Ark and kept perpetual worship around it. So it was joyful that the people brought the Ark back to the center of the life of Israel. Except for one of the things they had forgotten is about how the fact that the sacred and the profane can rarely occupy the same place. With the Ark gone for all those years, they forgot how sacred, how holy, how kind of this object meant to the people of God. They thought they could just bowl off the dust of Leviticus, kind of use it as a service manual and restart the worship. But it turns out in the midst of that, that little small print is very important. So they were bringing the Ark in at first, and they're bringing it down the road when it hits a pothole. Turns out the Jerusalem Department of Transportation is very much like CDOT. They kind of operate the same way. So when the oxen lurch, and the Ark looks like it may be unsettled, the priest Uzzah reaches out and touches with his human hand things that were never meant to be grasped, and he is killed instantly. Then we enter kind of the scenario of every priest's worst nightmare. Turns out when the power of God bursts forth, it makes things holy and hence untouchable. We can imagine those rushing to help Uzzah when they hear their first, their middle, and their last names telling them to stop, lest they be killed as well. The Ark had been away for so long, they forgot how awesome and holiness that emerges in the objects and places where the divine had rested. Now, in our modern age, as Presbyterians, we inherently have problems with this concept. Our theology says that all places are holy because God made them. The stone slab at Goody's Rest, where we hiked just last year, is as good a place and a holy place as our red cushioned pews here on Sunday. The cold Animas River is a good place to baptize just as well as we do here in the sanctuary. Presbyterians, we do not have an altar. We have a communion table. We do not have special folks set aside a priest. We believe that we in the priesthood of all believers. So each and every one of us is to be holy and to be before God. But this was not always the case. King David and the folks realized that they were not quite prepared to have the holiness of the Ark amongst them. So they dump off the Ark with Obed-Edom, which means the slave of Edom in Hebrew, which means they gave it to a slave, they gave it to a foreigner, or perhaps some sort of Jewish guy who was kind of known for his bad luck because he became the slave of the Edomites. Either way, it was not the elite's problem anymore. Except we quickly learn once again what holy can sometimes seem a curse, but it can also become a blessing. For 3 months, the house of Obed-Edom, everything is turning up roses. This guy who is perpetually down on his luck is suddenly winning the lottery every week. After 3 months, somebody lets the cat out of the bag, and they realize that something is going good. In fact, a little bit too good in this hard luck house. David finds out about that and says, "My house will flourish if I welcome the Ark." And this time he leaves nothing to chance. He goes down, and after about 6 paces, he sacrifices the best animals. They are holding nothing back in worship this time. Trumpets, cymbals, string instruments, hands clapping. The priests are dressed in perfect kit. The people are joyful. In fact, as Presbyterians, we would not feel comfortable. Yes, because there is also lots of dancing. The people are dancing. Out in front, and the most exuberant of all is King David. He's not in his crown. He's not in his rich robes. He's not in battle armor or even his expensive armbands, necklaces, rings on his fingers and rings on his toe are off. He is wearing a simple ephod, something like a loincloth or kind of an undershirt. But more importantly, he is dancing. Now above, in her royal quarters, David's first wife, Michal, daughter of King Saul, a royal princess from birth who was forced to marry the simple shepherd boy David after some deranged bet her father made, and then her father promptly divorced them, and now she is remarried to this warlord, to this mercenary David, who had been crowned king of kind of this breakaway kingdom, Judah, and now he is made king of Israel. And she looks down literally from the window of the royal palace, and she looks down figuratively at her bumpkin husband dancing his mind out. Now, let's also be clear. She isn't just rolling her eyes and saying, well, you just can't take the two-step out of the cowboy. She is truly despising what David is doing at her that moment. That disgust goes straight to her core. And let's also be honest. David is at the physical peak of his masculinity. Think Arnold as kind of Mr. Olympia. You know, David is also a war hero. Memorial Day was last week. So as old timers, think of Audie Murphy, you know, kind of the clean shaven guy. You know, Lee Campbell's following me on that one. You know, people my parents' age might think of Martin Sheen. Maybe my uncles would think of Charlie Sheen. My contemporaries would kind of think of Mark Wahlberg. And let's not forget that David is also a singer and a songwriter. He is also kind of the preeminent rock star. So now there is a tradition that rock bands are good at breaking things and sometimes performing clothing optional. I have it on authority, none other than Sage, our office musician, that the band Turnstile keeps this tradition going. In the 1990s, kind of in my era, it was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I always pictured somebody from my father's day and age, that being Ted Nugent, who famously wore a headband and loincloth as he danced around in the 1970s. And I think of that a little bit more, you know, especially after my father's graveside, where a high school buddy got up and told that he was a bandmate with my dad. And evidently my dad rocked the world because he was the first drummer to go shirtless and with a headband. There's things you learn at funerals sometimes. Now, I always pictured it kind of Ted Nugent style because years ago I was translating the Hebrew, and a particular word that is used to describe David that day is very interesting. Now, if you had been thinking about the dancing was something kind of, you know, extraordinary, maybe James Cagney and Yankee Doodle Dandy as he kind of tapped his way down those stairs, maybe you thought of it as kind of getting the heights of exuberance, and maybe you pictured a Gene Kelly jumping up on the lamp pole and singing in the rain. Or if you had more kind of an angular jazz, kind of Bob Fosse way of dancing, you would be completely in the wrong genre. The Hebrew word to describe the dancing David did was battering ram. There was nothing graceful about the dancing David was doing. And Michal was seeing that day. It lacked refined art. If it could be categorized, it would be like a martial arts performance. Think of Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris, you know, something that is kind of moving, dangerous, kind of odd, but it is definitely there. And above all, though, what was happening is David was worshiping in that moment. David is worshiping in the Spirit. More importantly, David does not care what others think. He is just going for it. In fact, in the moment he sacrifices to God, he shares also with those in attendance. There's kind of that part where basically he's handing out barbecue. He's giving fresh baked bread. He is handing out cake. He is even giving sweet bread with raisins. The food that is typically set aside for the royal banquet table is given to everybody late into the night. I will also note he is giving it to men and women, and finally they all decide to return home. And that's when we have another interesting scene. When David gets back to his home, David is rolling in late, and Michal, daughter of Saul, is waiting for him. And she is bringing full daughter of Saul vibes. We can picture her kind of arms crossed, you know, maybe her foot tapping. Guys, we might think of a time when we were out late after a game. Maybe a day where we mislaid our smart or cell phone and we are being dropped off by our buddies looking very much different than when we left. Maybe some of you have experienced that. But also, if we look back at our text, we have to add that rock star persona to this whole situation. Michal is accusing David of honoring himself, and by that, disgracing the position of king. Her father had been the first king of Israel, and she goes on to accuse David of uncovering himself before handmaids. That's kind of code for groupies. And basically being kind of the town drunk that was streaking down Main Street, disturbing the Iron Horse Classic. That's kind of what Michal is telling us. Michal read this situation wrong. Perhaps she thought she had the high ground, but David is going to take her down a notch. David points out it was before God that he danced. The same God that had abandoned her crazy father, the first king. And also her father, that first king, had squandered every gift he had been given. And the biggest was he had lost his kingdom and also the Ark of God. So David says he would do it all over again, will worship God any way the Spirit leads him. Moreover, people, even those ignorant, impoverished maids, will look on him with honor because he will humble himself before God. The implication is that Michal grew up in the lap of luxury, and the royal house should have had the class to honor her faithful husband at the gates of the house. Doubly on the day he danced before the ark, because he was honoring the holiness of God. He would be carried in feet first if he had been dishonoring God before the ark. He would have shared the same fate as Uzzah. It is not surprising that Michal and David's marriage is not blessed. She did not keep that day holy, and her marriage died as quick as if she had touched the ark herself. And this is sad because they would have made a great team. You know, Michal had kind of the institutional knowledge. Michal knew how a royal household was supposed to act. Michal was supposed to be paired with the energy of David, but she could not see beyond and at the heart of what David was doing. David was picked because God could see the heart of David, and David was devoted to God. Now we can also take spiritual meaning from this as well. Just because someone does not worship or practice faith in the same manner that we do does not mean that it is improper. We also have to realize that sometimes when we are in worship, we have to be in the moment. There are many an inexperienced pastor that tries a fire hoses of jokes at a funeral, and it seldom works. Likewise, at this time of year following Easter, there is always kind of this perpetual bemoaning of the division in the Church of Christ, or the division in Christendom. Why are there so many church denominations? Why are there so many Christians? Why cannot we get on the same page? One of the strengths, though, of being so diverse as a body of believers, we do have more than 31 flavors of Christianity, is there are some folks who do want to dance all the time. There are some folks that want to definitely hear the Hebrew or Greek words in every sermon. There are people who want to do things very different, and we can gather together and see how God shows us how to worship. Now, where we have to be careful, though, is when we approach how others worship. When I was at Ghost Ranch, one of my jobs was the co-chaplain and the co-youth program director, which means I had two jobs. And it also meant is when I was working with the youth, that's when all the programming became very churchy. So I would sometimes walk with the kids down the arroyo, the very small kids. And it was also when you had about 20, 30 minutes before lunch and they had worn out all the other staff. So I would take them down and we'd pick up rocks and we'd put them in a box. And I would tell them about the Ark of the Covenant, because one of the weird things is the Ark of the Covenant, besides carrying the 10 Commandments, besides carrying a piece of manna, would also carry the rocks that the people of Israel had carried over the river Jordan. One day I was sitting there with the kids, and sometimes you have to do games. And so we had the little kids, and we had them kind of doing a game, and we kind of had them rubbing their hands. They were drumming on the floor. We were just kind of doing kind of the noise game. You make a little bit of noise. And then soon Amy, who was my co-youth programmer, she got the kids to start making rain noises. And so they were soon making thunder sounds, kind of banging on the chairs and everything about how rain was done. And all of a sudden, she popped up and decided to do a rain dance. And all the kids got up as well. And of course, being Presbyterian and dancing involved, I beat a hasty retreat. And I also had to make sure our snack shop was full, staffed, and all those youth programmers, my college kids who had had the morning off, they would work in the afternoon, would sit there. And so I also knew the place was about ready to be flooded with kids. And so Jason, one of our kids from the reservation in Arizona, asked why I left early. And I mentioned Amy was leading them in a rain dance, and I had to kind of get out of there quick. And I didn't think of anything about it until the next day. I noticed we were with the same group of kids, and I noticed Jason was going to lead them in a game. And I sat there, and it's like, well, Jason's supposed to be getting ready to, get on the afternoon shift. He shouldn't be here. And so it was interesting, after the game that Jason played, he sat down with Amy and the kids, and he talked about how the rain dance was a sacred tradition among his people. How even as a Presbyterian, that a rain dance was one of the last-ditch offerings of worship. How in deep droughts, perhaps like the one we have this year, that the whole community dances, that the churches would hold prayer vigils, that the whole community would fast as well and pray for the return of rain. He told them that rain dancing was not for fun. It was a deadly serious situation. Jason was teaching about the sacredness of worship before God. Now, I liked Jason because he regularly attended chapel. And also, a fun fact, he married his sweetheart from Ghost Ranch, who was my professor of theology's only daughter. So every now and then I see them on Facebook. But another thing that this story helps us with is that it's great to get out of our spiritual comfort zone. David was probably more comfortable playing or singing the Psalms. His active life was in warfare, strategy, managing people. He is throwing all of his strong suits to the wind to dance out loud. And granted, his muscle memory was warlike, hence his battering ram style dancing. But he did do something different. Yet Michal, who knew the ways of the royal court, should have also remembered that it was said of her father Saul that he was among the prophets. At that point, the kings of Israel had been in the Spirit. Now, as we prepare to bring our Lord's Day to a close, perhaps we can think of ways that we can get out of our spiritual comfort zone. It is about time for camp to start. And it was not until I worked at Ghost Ranch and used this preaching text that I realized the gifts of camp. You can get there and enjoy it in the summer, and it does not matter where you are, whether it's the Pines over there by Sunlight Camp, whether it's the Oaks at Mountain Ridge Camp, or the Pinion in Ghost Ranch. There are places where we can experience, where we can experiment a little bit too. We have dancing, singing, praising God in the arts, or meeting people from denominations or different styles of worship. Summer camps are kind of a place we can do new things. Summer is also a time where we can get out of our area as well. We can go and experiment on summer vacation. If we are traveling this year, perhaps we can go to a different style of church. And let's hope that when we come back that we can be greeted with curiosity and wonder. Because we know that God can accept, inspire, and that we can worship in many different ways. And sometimes that might seem strange to others, but sometimes it is exactly what God wants us to do. And so in stories like this, where the Spirit is upon us, let us know that God will be inspired, will love the way we worship him.